morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Good morning. Thank you, Andy. I know Andy is particularly happy this morning because of a certain sports result last night. I was actually trying to celebrate with him earlier because I thought he was a Boston Celtics fan, but turns out that he's not. So anyway, as Andy's indicated, these are incredibly challenging times, and we thought to kick this wonderful meeting off, we would at least have a time to just opine about the situation as it occurs. Now, before I introduce our distinguished panel, I'm going to just make a few opening remarks. And this session is called Measures for Uncertain Times. So it's easy to start by listing what's wrong, what's not working. We know about shrinking budgets, research budgets, geopolitical shocks, weakened public health agencies. But today's session isn't really about what's broken or being broken. It's about how we respond. Now, we will not have all the answers. Maybe Chris does, but we will not have all the answers. But BioPharma has never had the luxury of certainty. What defines us is how we navigate or adapt scientifically, politically, operationally, especially when old maps no longer work. We're living in a moment when uncertainty feels relentless, the pace is fast, the stakes feel higher, faster, the stakes feel higher, and yet the mandate stays the same. We deliver safe, effective, accessible, affordable medicines for our patients. But we need to do it faster, under more pressure, and with fewer resources. So our panels today will bring insight from every part of the ecosystem, from the bench science to global manufacturing. All of them have made hard calls before. They've had to pivot, to invest, to lead through ambiguity. So we'll ask a couple of questions, but there'll be other questions as well. How do we de-risk innovation while public funding stalls? How do we retain talent when institutions lose trust? How do we redesign supply chains, portfolios, even career paths without losing momentum? But most important, and I think Andy touched on it, is how do we stay hopeful? How do we keep believing that science, collaboration, and leadership still matter, maybe more than ever? So let's use these 45 minutes, now maybe 40 minutes, to tell stories. And I know maybe that's overemphasized, Chris, that we can constantly tell stories. But I think it's still important to tell stories about what's working, stories of how we're navigating this uncertainty without fear, but with clarity, urgency, and the grit this moment really demands. So I'm just going to say one or two words about our panelists. We have Chris Viehbacher, who's the CEO, chairman of Biogen. We have Sue, what? CEO. What did I say?
And chairman.
Oh, okay. Well, you've got to elevate. I think of you as Mr. Chairman, So Sue Hockfield, who is former president of MIT, Bhartia, who is the co-founder and co-chairman of Jubilant Bhartia Group. And we have Sanat, I can't really ever pronounce your name, but Sanat C, who is the president of manufacturing at Merck. So I'm going to start this off, and I just really encourage you to be thinking about questions. I'll be asking questions and entertaining questions from the audience. And so we don't want this to be fully dominated by this panel. So, Sue, I'm going to start off by asking you, how should research universities respond to declining federal research support, especially when we know that many of the universities are focusing on high-risk, high-reward science?
I think that is, of course, to my mind, probably the most important question of the moment. We've enjoyed a mechanism of innovation that came out of World War II. So Vannevar Bush, who had been dean at MIT and had some other roles, was in charge of the science and technology development for World War II. That was simply miraculous. We won the war through the development of radar, the war-winning technology, and of course the bomb, the war-ending technology. And following the war, FDR turned to Bush and said, well, that worked pretty well. What are we going to do going forward? And Vannevar Bush wrote a blueprint for the following century that we have enjoyed called Science, the Endless Frontier. And he laid out, piece by piece, everything that would be needed to weave a fabric of certainly economic growth, the national strength, and opportunity for all Americans. And from my perspective as a former university president, I'm no longer president of MIT, and I have to say I wake up every morning thinking, phew, wow, nice clear morning for me, thank you very much. But Bush's program just laid out all the components to achieve the technological supremacy that the university has. And it included investments in fundamental research. It set up this fantastic program that we've enjoyed where fundamental research, that research that no one knows whether, when, how it might end up paying off, can't be afforded by any commercial enterprise. The government would have to fund it. And so we have enjoyed years, decades of incredible science and technology prowess because our universities have done the work that otherwise might be done by the government. Of course, dual purpose. First of all, we get these new technologies coming out that no one can afford to invest in. I mean, they're not going to pay off in the timeline that most investors require. And in addition to getting the technologies invented, we train the next generation of discoverers and pioneers. It's been a fabulous system. Now, when our current administration, and I will try to avoid saying any names, has decided to take billions of dollars out of, let's just say, Harvard's government-funded activities, designed as some kind of peculiar punishment for Harvard, the vast majority of those dollars are going to support innovation research, just the kind of research that provides the seed corn for the development by the startup and corporate enterprises. So having grown up in this environment, I kind of take it for granted that everyone understands it, but I have been astonished how little we have done to tell the nation and the world what this economic model actually is, so that when it's threatened, when our government wants to punish our university across the river, not my university, but the other one, they suspend funding, and that funding is, by and large, funding of research, scientific research. So I'm not sure that that effectively punishes the entities that they're aimed at, but it certainly threatens to decimate the structure of our innovation enterprise. There's a fabulous letter that was written by the president of the National Venture Capital Association that lays out in the clearest terms I've ever seen the whole innovation enterprise. And I just wish that we had been writing that kind of thing 5, 10 years ago so that the nation had a better understanding of what it is we do. Now, this is not to say, and I would be probably not the last, but maybe close to the last person to say that our universities need help and can change and could be better. I'm not certain that the scientific enterprise is the place I'd start in terms of making corrections. So I think we're at a moment of just extraordinary risk for our universities, but more importantly, extraordinary risk for the economic engine of our country and the leadership that our country has held in terms of innovation, producing products, and people that improve lives.
Thanks a lot, Sue. We'll get back to some of these points in just a little bit. I'm going to turn to Chris. Chris, you lead a large company. What are you and your folks thinking about in terms of long-term bets to acknowledging the uncertainty that exists, but yet not get paralyzed by it. So just give us how you're thinking about it with your company in terms of how to approach what's going on.
Well, I mean, there are clearly uncertain times, but I have to declare a bias. I am an optimist. I don't think you can be in this business unless you are an optimist. When you think about how the odds are stacked against you when you're doing risky research and development, when as companies you have to reinvent yourself essentially every 12 years. I mean, I look at Sanat and say, 15 years ago, who would have thought that Merck would become a powerhouse in oncology? They reinvented themselves. They've done so well, though, that they're going to have to do it again. And that's just a cycle of where we have been. And so I think as people in this industry, we're always having to look for opportunity in a period of great uncertainty. And Andy was asking me last night, in all my years, was there a period in the past that looked like this? And actually there was. I mean, certainly the Affordable Care Act felt like this. Now, in the end, as we've seen, we've actually thrived after that. And I can tell you, even if you go back to the mid-2000s when Medicare Part D was coming in, that also felt like we were under significant threat. And now both of those had the opportunity of increased coverage and higher volumes, and we basically traded off price for increased volume, and we're not necessarily seeing any of that opportunity here. But I do think that, there's not a lot of point just complaining about things. We're going to have to figure out how do we adapt and where are the opportunities, and they're going to be. I do believe that Congress ultimately is not going to want to see the competitive advantage of the United States in innovation eroded. Now, it's going to get bumpy, and things are not going to be the same as they were. There are going to be losers and survivors out of all of this, but if I say in 5 years we still have a vibrant innovation capability in the U.S., that's where I'm an optimist, and I believe that the funding will be there. Will the indirect cost recovery rates be the same? Will the NIH need still to have 31 institutes, or will there be some consolidation? I think there is space for some change to occur, and there has been an inertia in the system that has prevented some of that change. So some of the change is not going to be all bad. FDA is an area where we're deeply concerned, but there is also some noises about potentially some changes, particularly in ultra-rare diseases, for example, where there could be an opportunity. I do think, as a company, what we're looking at is, I spent 20 years in Europe, and Europe has always been a tough business environment. But if you really have a drug that works, if you really raise the bar on innovation, you can actually do well. Biogen has 55% of its revenue outside the U.S. Now, you can't do that if you don't really have breakthrough medicines. I was on another panel, somebody was talking about the 16th GLP-1. I mean, that kind of stuff, how many PD-1s does it take to cure cancer, right? And so I think one is bar for innovation keeps going up as the resources get smaller. You're going to have to really distinguish yourself. I think another is we're going to really have to figure out how we do R&D in a much more cost-effective way. If you think about clinical trial development, where we spend most of our money, we haven't innovated in that space in 50 years. And you've got tools like AI coming along that could actually make our business more effective and efficient. And we're going to have to do that. And I do think we're going to have to continue to defend the importance of innovation. It is too easy for people who are focused on short-term cost to ignore the long-term benefit of innovation. But that's a job that is a daily job. We have to all be ambassadors of our institutions, be they academic or corporate, and make sure that those decision makers continue to support it. But I do think we will come through this. Each company is going to have to figure it out. But we are, like I say, we are constantly in the mode of reinvention. We're constantly having to think about uncertainty. This is a big one, but I think if we think about it and find those opportunities and not focus so much on the woe is me, the thing is changing, we will succeed as well.
Well, thank you, Chris. I mean, get back to stories. I think at the very end, maybe we can sort of think about the kind of stories that we must be telling to all those that listen, including those in Congress, about the source of innovation. I think it's still not clear for many people where that comes from. Talk about basic science, really not understanding. I mean, every year, Congress goes through the same exercise of trying to be convinced that it's important to maintain NIH, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll get back to that. Sanat, I'm just going to go to you. Think very, very much about how to produce the medicines that we invent. So given all of the changes, the tariffs, geopolitical tension, how do you think about manufacturing now in this world? Are you thinking about redesign? I know you have some thoughts about that.
Thanks. Well, at a high elevation, one has learned the hard way since COVID that all of us have to create a diverse and resilient supply chain, be it the Russia-Ukraine war, be it all of these things, you have to do that. But then you also try to understand the business case when you build assets, when you build a network, when you build a supply chain sourcing model. And our realization is there's a very strong business case for building assets in the US for US revenues, which is why for 75 years, 95% of our vaccine investment has taken place in the US. But that does not mean it applies to all products in all markets. The second point is that whichever way we want to look at the tariffs and the non-tariff barriers, it's almost impossible to be self-sufficient in US or Europe or Japan without the help of China. If you take into consideration that more than $200 billion of generic imports take place in the US and the benefit goes to Medicare and Medicaid, and a good part of that comes from India, the fact of the matter is all the intermediates and all the API that come from India are dependent on the starting materials from China. If you take into consideration all the ancillary materials that we use in the US in companies like Thermo Fisher and others to give us the biological materials, a good number of them come from China. So there is a limit to which you can kind of start doing vertical integration and start saying that we can make it all in Europe and US. So that's the pragmatic limitation. The second thing is even if 35 to 40% of the ANDAs are approved by FDA, which come from India, again, they will be dependent on China. So whichever way you try to look at it, it's very difficult for me to see a world where the China dependence is completely zero. But then there are larger ramifications of this. The movement, based on what Novartis and Lilly and Johnson & Johnson and others are trying to do in terms of building US assets in the US for US sales, if you think that 45% of the revenues come from US, 55% from ex-US, but the profit comes majority from US, then the question is, once the US assets get built in the US for US revenues, what happens to the European assets? Now, why is that relevant? Because today, 34% of the APIs consumed in the US for branded products come from Europe. Now, of course, that is because of the tax issues and fiscal issues, which is why a lot of the companies started making in Ireland. There's a Swiss route and all of that. But when these things settle down and the economics is recalculated, there is a case where we have to see if the US assets provide for US sales, what happens to the European assets for ex-US sales? Is the margin becoming different as a result of that segmentation. So we have to kind of go into the equivalence of target product profile, target market profile. So what's the target asset profile in the future? And it may look a little bit different once we have all these kind of changes that happen in the future.
Thank you, Sanat. I'm going to move now to Hari. Hari and his group has footprints in both India and the United States, actually quite important in footprints in the United States. So I'd like to have you talk about your thinking from the India perspective, particularly of the effects of all these shifts on your efforts.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to talk about few trends which is affecting business for Indian companies. One is, which all of you know, that US policymakers are starting to think about biotech as a strategic infrastructure, almost, like semiconductors or energy, and that is starting to kind of, create issues around, we have seen there's conversation about tariff, but also how the relationship between US and China. The Biosecure Act was talked about, not implemented. And so how is India getting impacted with that? The second trend that we saw, that China, which was mainly, if you look at 15 years back, they are very good in manufacturing, many good in research, contract research. They built a great infrastructure and now built a huge, vibrant biotech industry. And people are talking about products being licensed from China back to US. The reverse trend is starting to happen. In the last few years, we have started seeing from Indian point of view, because of US approach towards China being cold, we saw a lot of contract research and some part of manufacturing starting to move towards India. It's a big move. But I must say that the Indian industry, to come to the level of capacity that Chinese have, will take us minimum 7 to 10 years. So we are 10 years behind. And the infrastructure is being built. The difference is, when I visited China 25 years back, there was a huge government support to build infrastructure. They built infrastructure much ahead of business. And I know they were almost 10% capacity utilized. And now that kind of support in an Indian system is not available. So there's no subsidies as of now to build infrastructure. So companies do it because it's a good business to do it. So that is starting to happen. And the other trend that I see is, Sanat, you spoke about key starting raw materials coming out of China. I think there's a huge effort in the last 5 years to de-risk all the raw materials from China. Even some of the companies who come to us are for large contract manufacturing are asking us, what is the Chinese component? Now, so Indian companies are also kind of seeing how we de-risk and produce all the even starting raw materials in India. But it's, as you rightly said, Sanat, it's not going to be easy. It's almost a 10-year program before we come to that level. And the other thing is, the Indian companies are also becoming quite global in its perspective. There's a vibrant we are also kind of following China, still behind. If I go 10 years back, there were only 50 biotechs in India. Now the last count was about 9,000. Out of that, 50% is in BioPharma, rest is in bioagri and industrial bio. So, but at the clinical level, very few products I think that's where China is much ahead. I saw the latest data that 30% of all global clinical trials are now happening in China. That's a very large number. So we still, our biotech ecosystem is still very much behind. And, but I must say that especially for India, and I probably realize it for China also, that most of our biotech ecosystem was developed because Indians and Chinese who worked in US came back and really created that industry. So that has been the US contribution, I must say, to both the countries. And so at the end, I will just say that from Indian industry point of view, what all is happening, I think is only accelerating or giving more business to Indian companies right now. This is what I see. And Indian companies are also investing in US for some of the products that would probably get manufactured in US for the US market. So that's where I am.
Thank you, Hari. I'd like to go to the audience in a few moments, and I know that in the audience we have a few people who have agreed to ask questions. So these are planted questions, but probably high quality. So Rajiv, Ajay, Ganesh, and also Charlie Cooney. So before we get to those questions, though, I'd like to ask the panel in general this question of, in these very challenging times, are there things that we might be thinking about doing that we ordinarily would not be doing? And I refer to sort of at least an area that I'm particularly fond of is, how do you continue to stand up more collaborative work, whether between companies or between academia and industry? So the whole idea of public-private interactions, they come in favor and then they decline in favor. And I just wonder what each of our panelists think about in their particular areas, how the current difficult climate might change that, or maybe not. So I'm going to just go down the line. Chris, what do you think?
One of the things I've seen is that actually too much money in the system is never a good thing. And I think we've had that to a degree. We've had enough money in the system where we don't really challenge how we do things. Even universities. I mean, universities had a lot of money coming in, and now we see Harvard, for instance. It's crazy that we think we're going to make the country great by attacking a great institution like Harvard. But we all would say, I think, that Harvard's probably one of the most difficult universities to deal with, actually. If you think about clinical trials, you try to go do a clinical trial at a major academic center, and they all want to have their way of doing it, and it slows down the whole clinical trial process. And maybe if they're a little hungrier, there might be a more opportunity to work with industry. And I think I can tell you the presidents of all the major universities here have all come to see me and say, how do we work with Biogen in a little different way? Because some of this government money is going to go away. But that also applies to the companies. As I said, I mean, the way we're doing clinical trials is highly inefficient. And if that positive area under the curve, which is the revenue stream, and that's what generates the return on investment for the negative area under the curve, which is the investment phase, if that's shrinking, we're going to have to shrink the negative area under the curve as well. And the reality is, there has always been a certain resistance to change. And we're already doing enough we're already doing enough risk, and the FDA wants it this way, and so let's not rock the boat. But you know, desperate times are often the time where you really see people thinking more about how to do things better. So I think that is one of the things that we're going to have to do, is just challenge how we work, how we work together. I mean, think about the duplication. I mean, if I look at, I'm a trustee of Northeastern University. We have spent $800 million building 2 research centers. And if you look at all the cranes in Cambridge, I mean, I don't know how many cranes there are at any one time on the MIT campus. And part of that was because this indirect cost recovery drives a lot of extra building. And, you know, I'm sure the universities could actually start to get together, even with us. I mean, we've got these expensive, you know, cryo microscopes, for instance, sitting in our basement. We used to just use the MIT one, you know, and I think there's probably an awful lot we could do to share resources and become a whole lot more efficient. But the economics of this industry are going to change.
Your comment about calls from university presidents, I know that over the last maybe 3 or 4 months, I've gotten many calls from current deans of medical schools. And the common question is, Bill, you know the industry. Don't you think that industry will provide us with a lot of funding to make up for the shortfall? And I said, well, I'm not sure that's going to be the case, but everybody, it's on everybody's mind. How do you, in this more challenging times, try to do still a lot with less? So, Sue, a comment about that, and from a university perspective?
Yeah, so MIT is, shall we say, among those forward-looking in terms of collaboration with industry. It was a real change for me to come from Yale University to MIT and just see how deeply engaged industry and MIT have been. And I'm not saying MIT is doing as much as it could or should. It's just that it's in a frontier kind of almost by itself. And I think thinking about new models for working together is absolutely critical. You know, the other thing that has my, you know, again, a little parochial perhaps, but Macron, van der Leyen have articulated the need for funds to recruit American scientists to Europe because, you know, it's going to be more friendly for them there than here. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you know, I like competition, kind of probably less than the next guy. However, it's an opportunity for us to step up to the task. And I have to say, you know, at MIT, which is so industry-facing, the opportunity to collaborate more, I think, is great. Unfortunately, we've set up a lot of barriers that prevent it, and I'm sure the barriers were set up with good intent. However, the speed of innovation right now, I think we're just, you know, really held back by the barriers that have been constructed to protect us and protect industry from the kind of exchange that I think would be really productive today. And you know what we're seeing, you know, one of the things that, I don't have numbers, and I should have numbers for this, is the paths that individuals took, you know, through the academy, into the academy, staying in the academy, actually, that's falling apart. So if we look at the graduates out of medical schools with MDs, huge fraction of those graduates are not going into the clinic. They're going into industry. And it's not, you know, you can, you know, kind of, you know, say somewhat, you know, I would say sophomorically, oh, it's the money. It's not the money, it's the opportunity. It's the opportunity to change the world, have an exciting impact. And so I think it's a moment, you know, crises are good for getting people to rethink what they're doing. And I think Greater Boston has all of the elements, and we should put our heads together and figure out how we can cross these barriers more easily.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, your comments about your school sort of reminds me of how Harvard has always been behind in terms of thinking of how to work with industry and others. You know, sort of a little beneath them to do that. So
I'm not going to criticize my friend and neighbor. However,
okay,
MIT.
We won't get into that any further.
Yeah.
Hari, so the same question, you know, from your perspective, does that encourage Indian companies, for instance, to be thinking about how there could be more collaboration or interactions of that sort?
Yeah, if I look at what we are doing, we are working with many of the academic institutions now, partnering on, because biology is being done here while the chemistry is being done in India. So even even universities are looking at partnering with Indian companies in seeing that how costs can be optimized. So we are starting to see that.
Can I just add this? The students are so hungry for industry experiences. And so this should be part of the curriculum, I think, in our science and technology activities. We've got to get our students, into the real workplace.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that is starting to happen in a big way. But I'll also add here that if I look at Indian government from Indian academia point of view, is putting actually double the amount of money now for supporting research, because I think there's more and more realization that if you don't fund early stage research, then you will not have good outcome in terms of new startups coming up. So, and I was surprised when I saw that in US we look at biotech as a strategic industry, and now the funding has been being reduced, because this will ultimately lead to lower number of startups in US. That's what I feel.
Yeah. Sanat, so from manufacturing perspective, is there any activity to have more collaborative work thinking about the problems as you talk about trying to have a new model of supply chain? I mean, it's not just a Merck problem. I know you have pretty much all the answers, but there may be answers elsewhere. Have you been thinking about that with your cohort?
Yeah, we have benefited a lot out of the consortium approaches, where we have worked with MIT and Purdue University, where we realized that the total amount of capacity that we create per unit dollar is much higher with a batch process. So if we convert everything into a continuous manufacturing process, certainly the footprint becomes less, and the fixed cost and the variable cost have a very different structure. So we worked for a long time with MIT, first in the small molecules, now in the large molecules. So these kind of collaborations must continue, because once you create the right kind of seed funding, the university can take up all these things to a totally different level by creating the support and creating the different kind of networks that they are able to create much faster and much more productively than an industry can, which is what we have always supported, and I think that should continue, and I think in our own interest, the industry should be able to support that.
Thank you, Sanat. So I'm going to call on a few of the questioners. Ajay Dankar can I ask you to start us off with your question?
Sure.
Introduce yourself. I think everybody knows you. But.
Yeah, I'm Ajay Dhankar. I run my own firm called Bluish Capital, which is looking for capital deployment in bluish opportunities. And prior to that, I was 30 years at McKinsey and Lazard. To be clear for the audience, the questioner is planted, not the question. And I have every intention of putting this fabulous panel on the spot a little bit. I think we could, based on everything that you all have said, and I think we know, the only certain thing in the current environment is volatility and uncertainty. The one thing that I have learned that happens in such an environment is that capital clams up. It is very difficult to deploy capital when there is so much uncertainty. Hari, to your point, excipients and precursors, China has owned the market for decades. And now India is investing in them, America is investing in them. A year or two from now, if the current administration reverses the tariffs, we are going to have a gigantic overcapacity. And all of that capital deployment will probably not return. Just as one example. So in such an environment, question to all the panelists, what is the one area that you see? Some of the optimistic areas, Chris, you commented on. What is the one area that you see where you believe capital deployment is a no-brainer? That in the current environment, if we deploy capital in X, Y, or Z areas, it's going to have a very high likelihood of returning. And the converse of that, where would you absolutely not deploy capital, at least for the next few years, given what we are seeing in the environment?
Thanks, Ajay. So anybody want to take that? Sue, you're
I'm going to go first just because it's easy, before all the good space has been taken. So one of the places that I'm excited about but ignorant about is AI plus. We're hearing a lot about AI this and machine learning that, but it's put to work for problems that you'd never, at least I would never have thought that works there. So the example I always offer is AI for radiology, mammography, and others. And it's, I always think about AI as numbers, right? If you've got numbers, you can feed that into the AI, but this just uses images. And the extraordinary power of AI machine learning to see things in images that the human eye cannot detect just tells me that that is a treasure trove, and I'm anticipating non-digital information being better understood using the AI and ML tools that are now at hand.
Thank you, Sue. So maybe quick comments
I'll still invest in R&D. I think, but you have to be really investing in areas of significant unmet need and have a real first-in-class medicine. And I go back to my European experience. I mean, I spent 20 years in Europe. If you have a medicine that really works, you will get a decent price for it because there is that need, and at the end of the day, people have to be healthy.
Yeah. Hari, and then Sanat. Any comments?
I think, Ajay, you should invest in Indian CRO and CDMO industry. No brainer.
Yeah. My answer is that, in a very narrow sense of the term, the future industry investments will go in platform technology. If you look at the capacity of one platform catering to different modalities and different therapeutic areas, it is immensely different and creates a very different life cycle of the asset for biologics and small molecules. It may not be possible for viral vaccines, but you can do it for recombinant vaccines. So that would be the orientation of most of the companies in investing in platforms, and not in the manufacturing world, but also in the R&D world.
So thank you. So next questioner, I'm going to get Rajiv. Can I see? Rajiv is a very shy individual. Supposed to be laughing at that. Okay. Rajiv, do you have a question?
Yeah, just get the mic. I wanted to ask a sort of positive spin on all of this, which I think many of you have addressed already. So I would say, given all the uncertainty, if you were to predict, say, 2030, 2035 in the next 5 or 10 years, do you think that the United States biopharma industry will be better off or worse off?
Okay.
And why?
I think I know the answer from you. So maybe quick comments. Is it going to be better or worse?
Well, I strongly believe, which I believed in always, is whenever a country has a talent infrastructure, the science infrastructure, and the risk capital, innovation will always win. And therefore, I remain convinced that the biotech world will definitely have a very good world. But it is also equally true that if all other industries can create a 15 to 20% return on capital employed with less than 50% gross margin, why will pharma industry always remain different is a question we can never avoid.
Chris, anything?
I think we will be better. It'll be different, and there may be fewer companies, but I think those who can figure out how to use, for instance, AI to make their businesses more efficient, those who can really focus on breakthrough, I think will do well.
Yeah. Sue?
Yeah, I'm an enthusiast for discovery. And our tools are better, our platforms are stronger, and I think we're entering a decade of extraordinary progress because the tools just get greater and greater.
So optimism. Hari?
With AI coming in, I think there will be a faster, in terms of outcomes that we will get, and but at a lesser cost, hopefully. So I see the industry prospering, but I also see that it will not be entirely US based. There will be almost 3 centers emerging, that is US, China, and India.
Thank you. 2 others. I didn't see Charlie Cooney. Is Charlie here? No. Ganesh? Ganesh, would you briefly introduce yourself? Briefly,
Sure.
yeah.
Hi, Ganesh Kaundinya. I'm CEO of a company called Glycoera, based here in Boston and in Switzerland. We are a precision immunology company, venture funded in the therapeutic space. Great discussion this morning. I want to come back to the protection of innovation and how models for that might have to be revisited, because it seems to me that the velocity of how quickly a fast follower comes in when you have a novel target has completely changed. It seems like before you know it, the market has flooded and the investment is also going to a lot of those fast followers. Hari, you mentioned the Biosecure Act. Are there other novel models of protection that needs to come into place so that we can continue to attract the investment for innovation?
Anybody want to start? Chris, you want to?
Well, I think if you're thinking about innovation, I think one of the things we're going to have to make sure we still do is be able to attract the best people. Because at the end of the day, innovation comes from people, and that's where I think there is a risk currently, to the extent that, MIT has put a freeze on I think postgraduate postdocs and things like that, and for most universities, if you're in graduate programs, you need over 50% of your students to be foreign to really survive. And if you look at our ecosystem, a lot of us were not born in the United States, but we came here because of the model. And so we do have to continue to make sure we're attracting the best people. We'll need to continue to defend intellectual property, for sure. And I do think, as an industry, we have to be cognizant of the fact that there is this balance between access and affordability and the need for a fair return on innovation. And that's kind of a little of the part. I mean, the number of times I come to these groups and we say, well, if we could only just go to Congress and tell them what wonderful people we are and what great work we're doing, they'll understand it. But, they have other constituents. And I think one of the other things that we have to listen to is there is a mistrust of institutions in this country. I mean, we can change the administration, but we have to go fundamentally. Why is it that people are questioning things like vaccines? And actually, there are a number of efforts. I happen to be working with the National Academy of Medicine at the one. We have to go back and convince people that they can trust science, they can trust scientists and our institutions. But right now, whether it's academia, government, or corporate, there is a big mistrust of large institutions, and that's one of the things we collectively have to change.
Maybe quick comments from the rest. This whole issue of trust in these institutions really is a very big issue, and that's where we probably need to focus our stories in the future. Sue, Harry?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got any deep insight about this. You can try as hard as you might to tell the story, to demonstrate the antecedents to any great thing people are enjoying. But I just think there's, Chris has got it right. There's just this, miasma of suspicion, and institutions are suspect. Universities are suspect. Your local grocery store is suspect, and I don't know how to change that, except to keep doing the good work, and celebrating it.
Sanat, did you have any last comments here?
Just one point to add to what was said by Chris. If you compare FDA and EMA, and you take into consideration in the field the inspection variability that takes place from inspector to inspector, that's a lot more higher with FDA than EMA. So all these things over a period of time create a mistrust. And I think there is a business case for dealing with some of these issues in a very logical way.
So we're going to have to close. The time goes by very, very quickly, and we've just touched on just a few issues here, of course, but you're going to hear many more during the rest of the day. So I want to thank the panel for your comments, your depth, and candor you brought to the conversation. What we've heard today makes one thing clear. Uncertainty is not the enemy of innovation. It's the environment in which innovation must thrive. We've heard about bold bets made without full visibility, partnerships forged across silos and borders, and teams rebuilt around resilience and not routine. These aren't just strategies, but I believe they must become sort of stories, as I've emphasized. They remind us that progress is still possible, especially when the path isn't straight. So we've heard also the warning signs. When trust erodes science institutions and systems built to protect and serve the public good, we risk more than just slower innovation. We risk losing the belief that the better is worth working toward. So the challenge, the opportunity, focus on opportunity is clear. Let us tell these stories, lead with transparency, reinvest in what still works, and continue to remember that hope in this field isn't naive, it is essential. So let's carry forward. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank the panel.